Imagine this. You've been away for 3 weeks, negotiating peace treaties in frozen northern territories, surviving on stolen moments of sleep and dreams of coming home. To him, your fated mate, your alpha king, the one the moon goddess bound to your soul with threads of starlight. You decide to surprise him, arriving a day early. The royal den is silent, moonlight pooling on ancient stone floors. Then you hear it, laughter echoing up from below, intimate and warm, coming from the sacred moon pool where you sealed your eternal vows. You descend the spiral staircase, heart pounding with anticipation, a smile already forming on your lips. And then you see them. Your mate stands waist-deep in glowing celestial waters, your sister wrapped around him, her legs locked at his waist, their mouths fused together in a kiss that sends lightning through the mate bond. You feel everything. The heat of his hands on her skin, the hunger in his touch, the satisfaction rolling through him. All of it, crashing into you like shattered glass. Your wolf screams inside your chest. The golden thread connecting you to him pulls taut, refusing to snap, forcing you to experience every sensation of his desire for someone else. You stand there in the archway, barefoot and trembling, the world tilting sideways. And then he sees you. Those amber eyes that used to hold only you suddenly go wide with shock, guilt flooding the bond like poison. She turns to, your own sister, and smiles. What do you do in that moment? Do you unleash your wolf and paint the sacred waters red? Do you collapse and let the agony consume you? Or do you turn and walk away, letting the pain forge you into something harder, something they'll never see coming? This is Laura's story, a story of the cruelest betrayal, the kind that doesn't just break your heart, it shatters your entire world and forces you to rebuild yourself from the wreckage. Chapter 1. Laura didn't remember deciding to run. One moment she stood frozen the archway, the next. Her feet were carrying her back up the spiral stairs, her bare soles slapping against cold stone as the mate bond exploded with sensation behind her. They hadn't stopped. Even after seeing her, even after those amber eyes went wide with shock, Edward's body was still responding to Elena. Laura felt it all. The spike of adrenaline mixing with arousal, the desperate clutching of hands, the animal urgency that came from being caught and not caring enough to stop. Her wolf snarled and thrashed inside her chest, demanding she go back, demanding blood and vengeance, and the satisfaction of tearing them both apart. But Laura's human mind knew the truth. If she unleashed her wolf now in the sacred moon pool, she would become the monster, the one who desecrated holy ground. The mad Luna who couldn't control her beast. They would tell that story for generations, and no one would remember why she snapped. She burst through the heavy oak doors into the main corridor of the royal den, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The ancient tapestries blurred past her, centuries of proud alpha lineages watching her flee like a coward. The mate bond pulsed and burned, Edward's pleasure building to a crescendo that made her stumble and catch herself against the stone wall. She pressed her forehead to the cold surface and bit down on her own hand to keep from screaming as his climax tore through the bond like lightning, indifferent to her presence, indifferent to her pain. When it finally ebbed, Laura forced herself to move. She couldn't stay here, couldn't face the guards who would pretend they hadn't heard anything, couldn't endure the pitying looks from pack members who would whisper that the Luna wasn't enough to keep her king satisfied. 3 weeks away, and he'd already replaced her. How long had this been happening? Months? Since the beginning? She made it to their chambers, no, his chambers now, and grabbed only what she could carry. A cloak. Her mother's silver dagger, the leather satchel with her identification papers, and the emergency funds every Luna kept hidden. Her hands shook so badly she could barely tie the strings. The bond flared again. They were moving, leaving the pool, and Laura could feel Elena's satisfaction radiating through Edward like a disease. She could feel his guilt too, sharp and acidic, but it was buried beneath something worse, relief. as if he'd been waiting for this moment, for Laura to finally see the truth and set him free. She climbed out the window rather than risk the main entrance, dropping 2 stories into the rose garden and rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through her shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the agony in her chest. Laura ran into the forest, into the wild darkness beyond the den's protective wards, and didn't look back as the golden thread of her mate bond stretched taut behind her, refusing to break, refusing to let her go. Chapter 2. Laura ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed against the base of the old watchtower, the one that marked the eastern border of Moonstone territory, abandoned decades ago when the pack expanded south. Moss grew thick on the ancient stones, and the wooden door hung crooked on rusted hinges. But it was shelter. It was away. It was somewhere Edward's scent didn't saturate every surface. The mate bond throbbed like an infected wound. She could feel him moving through the royal den now, could sense his panic rising as he discovered her gone. Part of her, the part that had loved him completely, stupidly, wanted to reach back through the bond and tell him she was safe. The rest of her wanted to claw that golden thread out of her chest with her bare hands. But worse than the mate bond was the pack link. It had been blessedly quiet during her frantic escape, but now voices began filtering through, dozens of them, a cascade of concern and confusion and barely concealed excitement. The Alpha King's mate had fled. The Luna was missing. Some spoke with genuine worry. Others whispered with vicious curiosity, already crafting narratives where Laura was unstable, jealous, unfit for her position. She heard Elena's name spoken with sympathy, as if her sister was the victim in all this. Laura pressed her palms against her temples as the voices multiplied, overlapping into a cacophony that made her skull feel like it would split open. The pack link was supposed to be a gift, a sacred connection that bound them all together. Right now, it was torture. Each voice a reminder that she belonged to these people, that she couldn't simply disappear, that her pain was pack business, and they would pick over every detail like carrion birds. She reached deep inside herself, past her howling wolf, past the burning mate bond, to the place where the pack link anchored itself to her soul. Luna magic, the elders called it, the ability to open and close the connection at will. Laura had never used it, before, had never wanted to shut her pack out. But these weren't her pack anymore. They were Edward's. They had always been Edward's. She severed the link with a mental slash that left her gasping. The sudden silence was deafening, disorienting, like going underwater. She could still feel the bond's presence, a distant pressure at the edges of her consciousness, but the voices were gone. She was alone inside her own head for the first time in 2 years. Laura dragged herself up the crumbling stairs to the watchtower's top platform. The moon hung full and luminous above the trees, the same moon that had blessed her mating, that had witnessed her destruction. She stood at the edge where ancient sentries once kept watch and lifted her face to that silver light. "I am not broken," she whispered to the goddess, her voice raw and fierce. "I am not ruined. You gave me this pain for a reason." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I will rise from these ashes. I will become something they never saw coming. This I vow." The moon offered no answer, but Laura didn't need one. She had made her promise. Now she just had to survive long enough to keep it. Chapter 3. 3 weeks in the wilderness changed Laura in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her hands grew calloused from foraging and building fires. Her senses sharpened, her wolf learning to hunt without the safety net of pack territory. She moved from the watchtower to a series of temporary camps, never staying long enough to leave a trail, surviving on rabbits and wild berries, and the stubborn determination that she would not crawl back to the royal den, broken and begging. The mate bond had quieted to a dull ache, though she could still sense Edward's presence like a bruise that wouldn't heal. He'd tried to reach her through it those first few days, pushing waves of regret and desperate longing that made her want to vomit. She'd learned to wall herself off, to build mental barriers that kept his emotions at bay. He didn't deserve access to her pain anymore. But this morning brought a new terror entirely. Laura knelt by a stream, splashing cold water on her face, when the nausea hit her like a physical blow. She barely made it to the bushes before emptying her stomach, her whole body trembling with the force of it. When the heaving finally stopped, she sat back on her heels and pressed a hand to her abdomen, her wolf stirring with sudden, urgent awareness. No, not now, not like this. But her body didn't lie. The exhaustion that went deeper than physical exertion, the heightened sense of smell that made certain scents unbearable, the strange fluttering sensation low in her belly that she'd been ignoring for days. She was pregnant, carrying Edward's child, the heir to the Moonstone pack, conceived before everything shattered. Laura buried her face in her hands, caught between laughter and screaming. Of course the goddess would give her this impossible gift now, when she had nothing, no home, no pack, no mate who deserved the title. A child who would be used as a political pawn the moment Edward discovered its existence. She didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Her head snapped up to find a man standing at the edge of the clearing, and her wolf immediately assessed the threat. Alpha. The power rolled off him in waves, though it was different from Edward's. Rougher, wilder, tinged with something dangerous. 3 vicious scars ran down the left side of his face, pulling his lip into a permanent half-snarl. His dark hair was tied back carelessly, and his clothes were road-worn and practical. Laura was on her feet instantly, her mother's silver dagger in her hand. Stay back. He raised both palms in a gesture of peace, but didn't retreat. His gray eyes, so different from Edward's amber, tracked her movements with predatory focus. Easy, I'm not here to hurt you. His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke. You're a long way from Moonstone territory, Luna. Don't call me that, she spat. Something flickered across his scarred features. Understanding, maybe. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. I'm Kale. Formerly of Shadow Ridge Pack, currently of nowhere in particular. A ghost of a smile. You look like you could use somewhere safe to sleep. No questions asked. Chapter 4. Laura had been staying in Kyle's camp for 2 days when Elena's voice slithered into her mind like poison. She'd thought severing the pack link meant freedom from all of them, but she'd forgotten that Elena wasn't just pack. She was blood. Sisters shared a bond that existed outside pack magic, a connection forged in childhood that Laura had never thought to sever. Missing you, big sister. Elena's mental voice dripped with false sweetness. Though I suppose you're not much of anything anymore, are you? Not a Luna, not a mate, just a runaway with dirt under her fingernails. Laura's hands, stilled over the rabbit she'd been skinning. Across the fire, Kyle looked up sharply, his wolf sensing her sudden tension. She held up a hand to keep him back and closed her eyes, hating herself for responding, but unable to stop. What do you want, Elena? Want? I already have what I want. Satisfaction radiated through the bond. Edward's in my bed every night now. No more sneaking around, no more pretending. He touches me the way he used to touch you, except better because I actually satisfy him. You were always so adequate, so dutiful. Like mating with you was a chore he had to endure. Each word was a calculated strike designed to wound. Laura's wolf snarled, demanding she reach through the bond and show her sister exactly how adequate she could be. But she forced herself to breathe, to remember that Elena wanted a reaction. He tells me things, you know, Elena continued, her mental voice turning syrupy. About how relieved he is that you're gone. How the mate bond was a mistake, a cosmic joke played by a goddess with a cruel sense of humor. He's petitioning the council to have you declared unfit. Once that's done, he can take a chosen mate instead. A pause, loaded with triumph. Me. The ceremony's set for the blood moon, 3 weeks from now. I'll stand where you stood and become what you could never be. A Luna he actually wants. Something cold and sharp crystallized in Laura's chest. She opened her eyes to find Kyle watching her, his scarred face unreadable, but his posture tense, ready to fight threats he couldn't see. "Congratulations," Laura sent back, her mental voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "I hope you're ready for what comes with that crown. The politics, the expectations, the knowledge that he'll do to you exactly what he did to me the moment someone more interesting comes along." "Oh, Laura." Elena's laugh echoed in her skull. Always so bitter. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of your throne. And when Edward's heir is born, I'll make her..." Sure, they never know their mother was too weak to fight for them. The connection severed abruptly, leaving Laura gasping like she'd been held underwater. Her hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach, protective and fierce. Elena didn't know about the pregnancy, neither did Edward, and they wouldn't, not until Laura was ready. She looked up at Kale, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "I need to go back to Moonstone territory in 3 weeks, to the Blood Moon ceremony." Her voice was steady, cold as winter steel. "I need to reject the mate bond publicly, before the entire pack, and I need to make sure everyone knows exactly why." Chapter 5, the Blood Moon hung massive and crimson over the ceremonial grounds, casting everything in shades of copper and shadow. Laura stood at the center of the ancient stone circle, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes fixed on her. All 5 allied packs had gathered for what was supposed to be Edward's mating ceremony with Elena. Instead, they were witnessing something that hadn't happened in 3 generations. Aluna's formal rejection. Edward stood across from her, looking haggard in his ceremonial robes. The past 3 weeks had not been kind to him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his alpha power felt unstable, flickering like a candle in the wind. The mate bond between them pulsed with his desperation, his barely contained panic. He'd tried everything to stop this ceremony. Threats, pleas, claims that she was acting under duress. The council had denied him. Aluna had rights, even a runaway one. Elena stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral, but Laura could see the calculation in her sister's eyes. She wore a gown meant for a mating ceremony, deep blue silk that shimmered under the blood moon. She'd already won, or so she thought. This was just a formality. The high priestess raised her arms, and the crowd fell silent. "Laura of the Moonstone Pack, do you stand before the goddess of your own free will?" "I do." Laura's voice carried across the clearing, steady and clear. "And do you reject the mate bond given to you by divine grace, understanding that such a choice cannot be undone?" Laura met Edward's eyes across the circle. Once, those amber eyes had been her whole world. Now, they were just eyes. "I reject the bond. I reject the mate who betrayed sacred vows. I reject the king who chose lust over honor." She placed her hand over her heart, where the golden thread connected them. "By the light of the blood moon, by my own blood and will, I sever what the goddess joined." The words were old magic, Luna magic that lived in her bones. She pulled on that power now, wrapped her fingers around the golden thread, and tore it free. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like ripping out her own spine, like setting every nerve on fire simultaneously. Laura heard herself scream, but the sound seemed distant, drowned out by Edward's answering howl of agony. "Ooh." Dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as his alpha power fractured visibly, cracks of darkness spreading through his aura like shattered glass. The bond snapped with an audible crack that echoed across the ceremonial grounds. Sudden, devastating silence. Laura stood gasping, blood trickling from her nose, her whole body shaking with the aftermath. But she was free. The absence where the mate bond had been felt like a missing limb, but it was clean. Final. She became aware of movement at the edge of the circle. Kyle stepped forward, his scarred face fierce with protective fury, and caught her as her legs gave out. His arms were steady, solid, real in a way nothing else felt in that moment. He helped her stand, and together they walked out of the circle, leaving Edward collapsed behind them, and Elena's carefully neutral expression finally cracking into something like fear. Chapter 6, Laura woke to the sound of breaking branches and knew immediately who had found her. The small cabin Kale had helped her fortify sat deep in neutral territory, warded with protective runes and hidden by dense forest. But Edward had been her mate for 2 years. He knew the taste of her soul, and apparently, even a severed bond left enough of a trail for a desperate king to follow. She was on her feet before he cleared the tree line, her mother's silver dagger in hand. Kyle materialized from the shadows of the cabin's eastern side, his own blade drawn, positioning himself between Laura and the approaching figure. Edward looked like a ghost of himself. His ceremonial robes were gone, replaced by torn traveling clothes stained with mud and what looked like blood. His face was gaunt, unshaven, and his eyes, those amber eyes that once held such confident authority, were wild with something between madness and grief. His alpha power flickered around him erratically, like a flame guttering in the wind. "Laura!" Her name came out as a broken rasp. "Please, just listen. You have 30 seconds before I let him remove you from my property," Laura said coldly, nodding toward Kyle. "Choose your words carefully." Edward's gaze flicked to Kyle with something that might have been jealousy in another life, but now just looked like hollow defeat. "It wasn't real. What you saw, what happened, none of it was real." He took a stumbling step forward, and Kyle's growl stopped him cold. "Elena used potions. Wolfsbane mixed with bloodroot and something else, something ancient. She'd been dosing my wine for months, making me compliant, making me want—" His voice cracked. "I would never have touched her if I'd been in my right mind. You have to believe me." Laura felt nothing. No surge of vindication, no flicker of hope, not even anger. Just vast, echoing emptiness where her love for him used to live. "No, I have proof," desperation made his voice climb. "The pack healer found traces in my blood. The council is investigating. Elena fled 2 days ago when they started asking questions. She's gone, Laura. And I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right if you'll just—" "No," Laura repeated, and this time her voice was gentle, almost pitying. That seemed to cut him deeper than any rage could have. "Even if everything you're saying is true, Edward, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't love you. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything for you at all except relief that you're no longer my problem." She placed a hand over her abdomen in an unconscious protective gesture. Edward's eyes tracked the movement, and something like hope sparked in their depths before she crushed it with her next words. "I will raise this child alone, far from your court and your politics and your excuses. You're not a father. You're not my mate. You're not even my king anymore." She took a breath. "You're just a stranger I used to know. Now leave before I let Kale make you." Edward stood frozen for a long moment, the last remnants of his alpha, power crumbling around him like ash. Then he turned and walked back into the forest, his shoulders bowed under the weight of everything he'd lost. Chapter 7. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the wildlands in silence. Laura stood at the cabin's window, one hand pressed to her now visible belly, watching Kyle split firewood with methodical precision. 4 months had passed since the rejection ceremony. 4 months of learning that survival wasn't the same as living, and that sometimes the quietest healing happened in the spaces between words. Kale had stayed, not because of a bond or obligation, but because he'd chosen to. That choice meant more to Laura than any divine decree ever could. He looked up as if sensing her gaze and offered one of his rare, crooked smiles, the kind that pulled at his scars but reached his eyes. Laura found herself smiling back, something warm and unexpected unfurling in her chest. Not the burning intensity of a mate bond, but something softer, steadier, real. That evening, they sat by the fire as wind howled outside. Laura had cooked a venison stew that actually tasted like food rather than mere sustenance, and Kale had praised it with such genuine enthusiasm that she'd actually laughed, for the first time in months. "Tell me about Shadow Ridge," she said quietly, watching firelight play across his scarred features. You've never said why you left." Kyle's expression shuddered for a moment, his hand moving unconsciously to trace the scars on his face. Then he sighed, setting down his bowl. Her name was Mira. "My fated mate," or so the bond claimed. His voice was rough with old pain. She was beautiful, charming, and absolutely convinced that being an alpha's mate meant power without responsibility. When I challenged her father's corruption, he was stealing from pack resources, leaving families to starve. She chose him over me. Laura waited, sensing there was more. The scars came from her brothers. 3 of them holding me down while she watched. They wanted to make sure no other pack would take me seriously as an alpha. His gray eyes found hers. She told me the bond was a mistake, that I was too idealistic, too weak to lead. So I rejected her publicly, lost my pack, and walked away from everything I'd ever known. "I'm sorry," Laura whispered. "Don't be." Kyle reached across the space between them and took her hand, his touch warm and deliberate. That bond was a chain. This, he gestured between them, this is a choice. Every day I choose to stay. Every day you choose to let me. There's more freedom in that than any divine decree could ever give us. Laura felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad. The baby kicked against her palm, as if in agreement, and she laughed through the tears. Kyle moved closer, his hand joining hers on her belly, his expression full of wonder. "I choose you too," she said softly. "Not because the goddess decreed it, not because I need you, but because I want you here. Because you make me feel like maybe joy isn't something I lost forever." Kyle leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, and absolutely nothing like the consuming fire of a fated bond. It was better. It was theirs. Chapter 8. The attack came at midnight, when the moon was dark and the forest held its breath. Laura woke to the sensation of wrongness crawling across her skin like insects. Beside her, Kyle was already moving, his wolf sensing the threat before his human mind could name it. "Stay inside," he growled, reaching for his blade. But Laura was already on her feet, her hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant, she moved slower than she'd like, but her instincts screamed that hiding wouldn't save her. Not from this. The cabin door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and shadow. Elena stood in the threshold, but she was wrong, twisted by something ancient and hungry. Her eyes had gone completely black, veins of darkness crawling up her neck like roots. The air around her shimmered with corrupt magic that made Laura's wolf whimper and recoil. "Hello, sister," Elena's voice echoed with layers, as if multiple beings spoke through her mouth. "I've come for what's mine." Kyle lunged at her with supernatural speed, but Elena raised one hand and he flew backward, crashing into the far wall hard enough to crack timber. He slumped, conscious but struggling to breathe. "The Nightwalkers send their regards," Elena said, drifting forward with movements too smooth to be natural. "Did you know your precious heir is the key? Royal bloodline on both sides, conceived under the full moon, carried by a rejected Luna. The prophecies speak of such a child, a vessel pure enough to anchor the Nightwalkers in this realm permanently." Her smile was terrible. "I just need to extract him a bit early." Shadows coalesced into blades in her hands, sharp and hungry. Laura, backed against the wall, her mind racing. She had no magic, no supernatural abilities beyond basic wolf shifting. Her mother's bloodline had been powerful once, but that was generations ago. She was just... Elena struck. The shadow blade drove toward Laura's abdomen with lethal precision. Laura threw up her hands instinctively, a scream tearing from her throat, not for herself, but for her son, for the innocent life she'd sworn to protect. Light exploded from her palms. Silver, pure and blinding, it cascaded outward like a wave of liquid moonlight. The shadow blade disintegrated on contact, and Elena shrieked as the light seared her corrupted flesh. Laura stared at her own hands in shock as they blazed with power she'd never known she possessed. The light spread from her palms up her arms, silver veins of luminescence that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "No!" Elena hissed, her black eyes wide with genuine fear. "The bloodline was dormant. You were tested as a child. You had no magic. I have everything I need." Laura's voice resonated with ancient authority, and she understood suddenly what had awakened. Not pack magic, not Luna gifts, royal bloodline magic, triggered by a mother's desperate need to protect her child. The same power that had built kingdoms before the packs fractured into territories. She raised her blazing hands, and Elena fled into the darkness, her screams echoing through the forest. Laura held the light for another moment before it faded, leaving her gasping and trembling. Kyle was at her side instantly, his arm around her waist as her knees buckled. "That," he said with something like awe, "was incredible." Chapter 9. The war horns sounded 3 days later, their mournful cry carrying across the wildlands. Laura stood at the edge of the forest, one hand on her belly, where her son kicked restlessly, the other clasped in Kale's scarred palm. On the horizon, smoke rose from Moonstone territory. The Nightwalkers had finally made their move, and Elena was leading them straight to the heart of the Packlands. "You don't have to do this," Kyle said quietly, though they both knew it was a lie. She was the only one who could stop Elena, the only one whose bloodline magic could counter the Nightwalker corruption. "Yes, I do." Laura turned to face him, memorizing the fierce devotion in his gray eyes. "But I'm not doing it for Edward or the pack that cast me out. I'm doing it because my son deserves a world that isn't drowning in shadow." They arrived at the battleground as the sun began its descent. The 5 allied packs fought desperately against creatures that shouldn't exist. Nightwalkers given physical form through Elena's dark bargain. Shadow beasts that devoured light and left only cold behind. Laura saw Edward in the thick of it, his fractured alpha power barely holding as he fought alongside warriors who looked at him with doubt rather than loyalty. Elena stood at the center of the chaos, darkness writhing around her, like a living cloak. When she saw Laura, her corrupted smile split her face. Come to surrender the child willingly? How noble. I've come to end this. Laura's hands blazed silver as she called on the power that now sang through her veins. Not borrowed, not gifted. Hers by blood and right, and the fierce determination of a mother protecting her own. The battle that followed was brutal and beautiful. Silver light clashed against consuming shadow. 2 sisters locked in a war that was always destined to happen. Laura felt her bloodline magic fully awaken, felt the presence of queens who had come before her lending their strength. She was no longer just a rejected Luna. She was sovereign in her own right. Elena's scream of rage turned into a howl of pain as Laura's light burned away the Nightwalker corruption, leaving only her sister, small, bitter, and utterly mortal. The shadow creatures dissolved like smoke without Elena's power anchoring them. Then the first contraction hit. Laura gasped, doubling over as her body decided that now, in the aftermath of battle, was the perfect time to bring new life into the world. Kyle was there instantly, lifting her as warriors formed a protective circle around them. Not ideal timing, she managed through gritted teeth. "You've never done anything the conventional way," Kyle replied, carrying her toward shelter. "Why start now?" Hours later, as dawn painted the sky gold and pink, Laura held her son against her chest. He was perfect, tiny fists, dark hair, and eyes that would probably turn amber like his father's. But he was hers. Hers and Kale's by choice, by the family they'd built from broken pieces. Edward appeared in the doorway, hesitant and humbled. Laura met his gaze steadily. "You can know him, visit him. But I am his mother, and Kale is the father he'll know. We're not coming back to the royal den." Edward nodded slowly, understanding that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. "What will you do?" Laura looked down at her son, then at Kyle, whose hand rested protectively on her shoulder. "Build something new. Something better. A sanctuary for those who don't fit into pack politics and faded bonds." She smiled, fierce and free. I'm going to be the queen I was always meant to be, just not the one anyone expected. The end.